Give us a sense, if we kind of set aside, restaurants and the broader hospitality industry for a moment, of the upward price pressures that publicans face.
Well, it's widely acknowledged that the hospitality industry is facing huge challenges in terms of cost of business. We've seen in our industry input costs over the last 3 years, for example, beef 98% up in 3 years, electricity just over 105%, chocolate 146%. So they're the types of price inflation that we've seen in our industry, and we have to manage that. And also, we have to acknowledge also that our own customers are facing cost of living as well. So a lot of our businesses and many businesses across the country in the hospitality and the pub industry, and you can hear from the Vox Pop there clip, business have cut staff. They've tried to change their business model as best they can. But from what we've said very clearly to the government, and it's in the programme for government, is the delivery on the 9% VAT rate for hospitality. We need to look at prioritising food tourism into the future, and also looking at and it's in the programme for government also as a review of the PRSI rates for our industry, and that would be right across, not just hospitality, would be retail also. And they're the top priorities that we need to look at. And I'd also welcome the publicans' proposal around the rebate for draft beer also, because we're in the same business, we sell alcohol, and it would be good for our industry as well.
They're pretty big asks, aren't they, when you add them all up? I mean, review the PRSI, VAT reduction, an excise rebate, and on top of which the government will say, well, listen, we've paused the minimum wage increase, we've paused the 6-pay extension, and we've paused auto-enrolment of the pensions, all to help SMEs.
Well, just to point out on the minimum wage, we've seen the minimum wage go up by 28% over 3 years. We've seen the sick days go from 3 to 5. So, we welcome the government's position in terms of the pause. And our position on the minimum wage, I want to be very clear on this, is that minimum wage in our view should be in line with inflation. If inflation goes up, minimum wage goes up in line with that. We've seen minimum wage go up 7-8%, where inflation was only about 1%. So we need to look at, and we need to be very conscious that we are a country that is dependent on tourism. We need to make sure that we fix that problem around the Dublin Airport cap as soon as possible, so that we can increase the tourism numbers into the country. But we need to be competitive when tourists come into the country. And we need to make sure that we put the best foot forward in terms of how we deliver.
Okay. So not only pause the next minimum wage increase, you want to change how the increase in minimum wage is calculated, just on top of reviewing the PRSI, changing the VAT and an excise rebate.
Not pause.
Anything else?
Kieran, just to be
direct
clear,
wealth transfers maybe to publicans?
Well, from our industry, we're the largest employer in rural Ireland. We employ nearly 240,000 people across the state, and which is, there's parts of this country and there's no other employer, only tourism and hospitality. So we need to protect that industry as best we can. And, we as I said already, we welcome the government's position on the 9%. They must deliver on that.
Ryan, how soon will you deliver on the 9%? First question. Second question, will you also look at what the vintners are asking for today and Adrian supports, which is an excise rebate, a 40% excise rebate?
I guess, first of all, they're all part of the budgetary process, so there is a commitment in the programme for government, which is obviously we have signed up to in Fianna Fáil. The budgetary process will be starting shortly, will obviously result in the budget in October, and at that time I think we'll have much more clarity on the 9% VAT rate. I guess the Vintners Association are out early in terms of lobbying for the budget in terms of the 40% rebate. That's clear, and that will obviously all have to become part of the overall budget process. I think pubs in rural Ireland are really struggling. I would see that. I come from a very rural constituency and not too far from Adrian, actually. And I've canvassed so many rural villages that went from having 3, 4, 5, 6 pubs down to maybe 1 at best now. They are struggling. The 9% VAT rate will be a help. The increased cost of business grants and the Power Up grants last year, totaling 400 million, were a help for a lot of those, but further supports might be needed.
And what's your, then, as a policymaker, what's your understanding as to why that's happening? Are they closing because of economic concerns or constraints, or because of changing culture, changing habits?
Changing culture is definitely a big part of it. Like, we see statistics proving that our consumption of alcohol is decreasing year on year. It has changed generationally, I think. Younger people in this country, I think, are a lot more interested in fitness or interested in active lifestyle. That is part of it as well. But there still is an important place for this, I think, particularly in rural Ireland where these pubs are.
And what's your vision then as to what impact a reduction in VAT or an excise rebate might have? Is it so that the publican can put more money into their pocket, or reduce the price of their product?
I think people running these establishments work extremely hard, work extremely long hours, and at the moment they're seeing the costs continue to rise. But we also have to remember that they are very, very important employers in our constituency as well. And obviously on the other side of that, we are seeing prices increase for the consumer, and that is difficult for the average consumer out there, for the person that wants to go out for their meal or have their few drinks. Maybe they're able to do that a bit less because prices are rising. But that will also have an impact on the level of service, on the amount of employees they can have in their establishments, but also how much of a turnover they're going to get if people aren't able to go out as often because prices are so high.
Ken, what would you do?
Well, I have to say, I think Adrian has some very valid points in what he's made, in fairness. The VAT at 9% has to occur. I think we have a situation where, 265,000 people are working in the hospitality industry. We're looking now at a situation where I don't know where the country pub or where the little town pub is going to go after this. They're generally mom and pop family businesses. And it's a bit like the Irish farm. They are dying away. Nobody wants to take them over. And why? Because costs have gone through the roof. As we've heard, beef up 98%. I went into sorry, I don't want to say the name of the cash and carry, but I went into a cash and carry the other day, and olive oil, which I was buying at one stage myself for €33, for 5 litres, is now up to €84. You know, those costs. And how do you know, there's only so much you can charge for a bowl of soup before people say, forget about it, I'm not going out anymore. You have to bear in mind, your customers have a cost of living problem. Your insurance has gone up.
But if the prices of those input costs don't come down, be it energy or beef or olive oil, essentially what you're talking about is subsidising an industry that's loss-making.
Well, I think there has to be, a framework put around the hospitality industry, which has never really happened. And look, let's be fair about it. There are some people in the hospitality industry, the likes of the Hiltons, the likes of the Marriotts, that will survive. But then there's the small mom and pop businesses down in Mallow or down in West Cork or places like that are operating a nice little business. It's you're working day and night, but you're working for your staff. And people are saying, this has been my father's pub, my grandfather's pub. My son doesn't want to take it over. My daughter doesn't want to take it over. A, the amount of hard work that goes into it, and B, there's not a living anymore in that. So there has to be a framework around that. And I'll give you a very big example.
Why? Nobody's going to rejoice in the last pub in the village closing, but why? Why should the state intervene? Well, keep the final pub open where once there were 6 or 7.
But would you not agree that we have to save and keep 260 jobs in the state in the hospitality industry? You know what, Ireland? 260,000.
But they're not all working in mom and pop pubs. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a specific,
but a lot of them are
part of the hospitality industry.
Kieran, what makes Ireland charming? Look, Ireland will never be as good as Spain when it comes to price, right? Or will never be as good as Portugal. It's a race to the bottom when you're talking about going to being price driven. But what you have to do is you have to give a great experience. And Ireland is very good at giving experiences. You go to the United States, people that have visited Ireland saying, I went to this little pub and I met this family that were still running it. We ate the best of seafood. We ate the best of Irish beef. We ate the best of this. We visited Blarney Woolen Mills and we were able to buy great quality. We're very good at giving quality.
So the Exchequer subsidises the local pub so that a rich American tourist can spend money in Blarney Woolen Mills. Is that it?
Perhaps you're not understanding me.
No, I really haven't.
No, but you have to. This is about keeping the industry alive and keeping the industry going. This is about ensuring that businesses and towns don't fail. This is about ensuring that people are still working. And if you have to put a framework around that where it works, where the 9%, where the rebate will work as well.
Is it the job of government to subsidise a failing industry?
It is the job of government to try and keep as many jobs and keep as many rural towns and keep as many villages operating and open. And you have to bear in mind that these businesses do an awful lot more. It's a bit like the post office. These are the places where people gather for the cup of coffee. The people gather for a conversation. There may be very, very little, in particular in rural Ireland, where you don't have the big community halls, where you don't have life outside, besides the GA club, if you're lucky to have one. But the life is in the village. You may not be a big drinker, but look, you might go in for the crack. You find out where people are. You find out what's meeting. You go in for the game of cards. You have to protect that. It's about society. It's not about alcohol.
Kevin, economic solutions will solve economic problems. Is this an economic problem or a cultural problem?
Well, I think there's a few things. Actually, everything the three guys have said is true, but there is a level of realism in the politics of this that speaks to your question, which is the VAT rate cut, which is promised, and it's going to come in January, we presume, unless there's some economic shock between here and there. That's going to cost 675 million. So now let's put that on the table and then start talking about what we need for the housing crisis that the government can't get on top of. Then we start talking about the childcare promises that every party before the election said they could bring childcare down to €200. Then you start talking about the metro, which we've been talking about for decades. And suddenly these things add up. So when you start listing off the PRSI and the idea of an excise cut and all the rest on top of that, and you're asking the question, I know Ken says it's not about drink, but there is a reality. What do you go to a pub to do? Yes, you have the community aspect. Yes, you have the cultural aspect. And don't get me wrong, I love nothing more than going home to Ferban and going to the local pub for a pint. There is a great thing. It is part of us, our society and our culture. But at the same time, it is a place you go to drink.
But government policy can't be encouraging people to drink more as the way of keeping pubs open, can it?
Well,
is anyone supportive of that? Is that government policy? Encourage people to drink more alcohol?
I don't think that is government policy, no, but I don't think this discussion is around trying to get people to drink more. As I said already, we as a nation are drinking far and far less, and that is part of the problem. The other part of the problem is
So how do we keep the single pub open, left in the village, that's operating at a loss at the moment, if we don't want people to drink more alcohol in it?
I'm not saying we don't want people to drink more alcohol. We're talking about the increased costs of it. But there is also
I think you just said you don't want people to. So you do want people to drink more alcohol in the pub?
There is also the side of it, if I'll just finish my point, there's outside of the cost side of it, there is also the fact that a lot of these family pubs don't have generations coming up that want to take them over as well, because some of those young people have perhaps left the home place, they've gone to work in cities, or they've gone to work abroad, or they've become professions in their own area, as opposed to what we saw historically in the past, where there was always a generation coming up along. I suppose part of it is that some young people don't see it as a viable economic model for them. They don't see it as a livelihood that they can properly make out of it. But that is all around the change in commercial aspect of it. The amount of drink we're drinking, like I said, is reducing. So therefore, obviously, revenues will reduce. We're seeing that by virtue of the fact, like my original point, that we're going from 5 or 6 pubs in some villages to now 1 pub, and at the same time population is increasing in those villages. There is a change of culture in this country.
There's absolutely a change of culture, because before pints crossed that €5 Rubicon, those pubs had closed. I don't know how many pubs there were in Ferban, but there was more than there are now, Kevin.
Yeah, there are, I could count them on, I think there's probably 3 viable left, and there were, I'd say when I was growing up, 6 if not 7. That were all packed of the weekends, and the ones that are left are very often quiet now when you go home. I think the 5 group, it's now crossed €6 in a lot of places, particularly the closer you come to Dublin. And I suppose the idea, what do you go to a pub to do? To drink, right? So we're saying young people are drinking less. That's one thing. We're saying the prices are probably driving parents or older people who are on pensions can't afford to go and have 4 or 5 pints. So there's a clear problem there. But like, if you look at petrol stations, there's the local shop, which has suffered a similar fate in many places. But like a lot of those small self-owned petrol stations, they don't make any money on petrol. So the petrol lures in the driver because they need it. It's a necessity. But they're actually making the money on the crisps and the chocolate that they're selling you at the counter, that when you go in, you impulse buy. And I would wonder whether pubs have to reinvent themselves a little bit if people don't want to go. We're saying young people don't want to drink.
Yeah. They have, in fairness, and you'll know that. Most pubs are doing food. Most pubs are doing the toasted sandwiches. Most pubs are running the various competitions, the table quiz. They're running the music at night. They're running various things to stay afloat and keep themselves open.
But they're not.
You made a point. You made a point about the VAT. You made a point about the VAT.
But those pubs, despite that, and you're right, absolutely. And we heard from one in County Louth at the start of this conversation. Despite that, they're losing money. And Adrian, this is the problem, isn't it, that members in your industry face? Is that some of the things you mentioned at the outset, beef, energy, chocolate. You speak to food economists, and they will say, actually, what we experienced for the last 10 years was the aberration, the low prices. those prices are probably not going to come down considerably. So we have to learn to deal with those remaining high or even creeping higher.
Look at the VAT take. Look at the VAT take, though. Look at the VAT take. Because they've doubled in price, because beef has gone up almost 100%. Look at the VAT take for the government. The government is coining it again on VAT. So you can afford to bring it down back to the 9% as well, instead of the 13%. Because when you were when you were buying beef for €100 as opposed to €200, you were charging 13%. So there is value for money on VAT, I think, if you bring it down.
I think if you speak to any business owner, be it in a pub or a restaurant or any business tonight, it's challenging because of costs of electricity, all that I've listed out already. And what we're saying very clearly here is that the government needs to support Indigenous businesses in rural areas to keep the jobs in those local areas. If a pub closes down, those jobs are gone. They're gone to the 10 miles down to the next town or wherever else. And that's you're basically putting another issue into rural Ireland, which is social isolation, and which has more other effects as well. So what we're trying to do here is we're putting forward suggestions. Republicans have put forward a suggestion.
But we're talking about, Ken is talking about making pubs a viable business by diversifying what they're offering. What you're talking about there, it sounds like, is that there's a social value in the state subsidising a loss-making business in these towns.
I'm not saying that the state should subsidise. What I'm saying is we need to get our costs under control. And one of the biggest things, and from my sector and the restaurant industry, is that VAT rate of 9% was the average for Europe. We were at 13.5%, which is the second highest in the European Union. And at least the government has acknowledged that, and that will give us a small bit of a cushion, hopefully, when it comes in on the 1st of January.